Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Mrinmoy Pramanik. I teach Comparative Indian Language and Literature at the University of Calcutta. Today we will discuss a module from Comparative Literature, Drama in India. And the module is on New Performative Ambience, Theory and Performance, Productions. The content of this module is written by Surajit Maiti, University of Hyderabad. Artistic development demands the ability to constructively question established methods. New performative practices give rise to art that challenges the commonplace. One of theatre's greatest periods continues today. The modern period and its drama were shaped by world-changing forces such as industrial technological revolution, democratic revolution, and an intellectual revolution that would disrupt earlier conceptions of time, space, the divine, human psychology, and social order. As a result, a theatre of challenge and experimentations emerged. Realism, the movement with the most pervasive and long-lived effect on modern theatre, was conceived as a laboratory in which the ills of society, familial problems, and the nature of relationships could be objectively presented for the judgment of impartial observers. Its goal of likeness to life demanded that settings resemble their prescribed locales precisely and seem like rooms from real life in which one wall have been removed. The playwright Henrik Ibsen initiated the realistic period with plays focus on contemporary day-to-day themes that skillfully reveal both sides of a conflict through brilliantly capturing psychological detail. Anton Chekhov in Russia would bring the form to its stylistic apogee with plays whose even minor characters seem to breathe the air we do and in which the plots and themes are developed primarily between the lines. An independent but concurrent movement, naturalism, would be an even more extreme attempt to dramatize human reality without the appearance of dramaturgical shaping. While realist plays would address well-defined social issues, naturalist plays offered a simple slice of life free from dramatic convention. With the same reverence for nature, the human being was conceived as a mere biological phenomenon whose behavior was determined by heredity and environment. Rise and evolvement of different forms. A counterforce to realism, initiated by symbolism, began in the late 19th century that would expand into what might be called anti-realist theatre. Symbolism would contest realism's apparent spiritual bankruptcy with a form that would explore through images and metaphors the inner realities of human experience that cannot be directly perceived. A focus on traditional aesthetic values such as poetry, imagery, and profundity would reflect the importance of purity of vision over observation, abstraction, and enlargement over the mundane and ordinary. The movement spread quickly and affected every aspect of theatrical production. Symbolism's contestation of realism gave rise to an era of isms, during which the aesthetics of dramatic art assumed a new social and political significance. Such isms became, in time, used consciously as stylization in new dramatic formats. Such anti-realistic theatre does not discard reality but enhances it with symbol and metaphor, elucidates parable and allegory, deconstructs and reconstructs subjects through language, scenery and lighting, and finally uses the theatre's own theatricality explicitly. Briefly examining 11 of these movements makes the diverse qualities and perspectives within anti-realistic theatre apparent. From the emotional and irrational perspectives of theatre of cruelty to the rational and thought-provoking nature of intellectual comedy. Pre-World War II, anti-realistic approaches such as expressionism, theatricalism, and the French avant-garde challenged and extended the limits of theatrical art. Though redefining the importance and function of language, extending the concept of character to include abstract forces or archetypes, reconstructing stage imagery through metaphoric scenery and lighting, and exploring themes often tinged with anxiety. Such isms and stylizations have created much of the theatrical language used on today's stages. Following World War II, theatre of alienation would introduce new theatre practices and reawaken theatre's sense of social responsibility. While the theatre of the absurd would express the futility of all action and pointlessness of all direction, philosophical melodrama accepted the absurd premise that humans are alone in a silent universe, but takes it as a challenge to creating an effective life. The comedy of contemporary manners would unmask the ridiculousness of social convention, while political satire ruthlessly reveals the hypocrisies and exploitations of political and economic systems within a comedic and often highly stylized framework. The case study uses most often medical problems as a perspective for philosophical investigations, frequently taking the audience into and back out of the patient's experience. Now let us focus on new performance or new performative traditions. An audience not only goes to the theatre, it does to the particular part of the city where the theatre is located, and the memories and associations of that part of the city help to provide a reception context for any performances seen there, stated by Michael Waters. A characteristic of performance is that it exceeds borders between different media due to its aesthetic encounter, in contrast to the happening, which places the artist or the viewer into an open, not a repeatable situation in order to blur or smear the distinction between life art. Performance draws on a distance between art and everyday life and creates in this way a definable interior space in social reality. Following Schechner, therefore any human expression could be recognized as performance. Beyond that, the artistic performance exhibits a meticulously planned dramaturgy and is analytically interfused. This analytic structure is to be arranged for the public in the performance. The illustration below clarifies this framework of the performance, and you can find the illustration right on the screen. Essentially, there are three different conceptions of performance which can be differentiated. In its most general sense, performance is the doing or showing of a certain ability or skill. For example, the theatre, in some forms, notably more modernist, falls into this category like other forms of entertainment. For example, art, sports, and so forth. A second conception of performance encloses the showing or the conscious presentation of an observable and culturally coded behavior pattern. For example, examples of this form of performance are the ritualized first fights between male visitors bars of the rural Middle West of the USA. Here originally, violent and unforeseen fights between bar visitors were normalized into a semi-violent form of semi-theatrical bar performance. In this case, a subliminal script exists which guarantees that in these fights, which are produced particularly for the other bar visitors, nobody is seriously hurt, and more importantly, everyone gains an increase in reputation. The third conception of performance aims at the general success of an activity in the context of a given standard, which does not even have to be articulated precisely. In this case, the task of the evaluation of the success of the performance is given to the audience and does not remain with the performer. Forms of this kind of performance are, for example, ritualized actions with a collective goal beyond entertainment and artistic experiment. The Masusema ritual or chain prayers on Fiji is an example of such a performance. In this process, the power of ancestors that is regarded to be potentially dangerous is to be damned by dint of prayers, etc. And the power of living persons who conceive of themselves as powerless is strengthened. Another example of this conception of performance is the organized fox hunt with hounds in rural England. The performer transfers the decision about the evaluation of the event, whether the performance is succeeded or not, to the audience, mostly rural and conservative people of the villages who participate by watching the slaughter. They act as audience and participants who immerse themselves in the brouhaha, the disenchantment, and sometimes the boredom fox hunting creates. In the context of the performance, the meaning given by the audience is thereby not simply due to its framing function as an addressee of the cultural meanings or message or information, but also in the transmission of the responsibility of the success of the performance. The communication process between performer and audience. The public is an equal partner and sine qua non of the performance. The actor or performer functions as medium of this communication shown above. The performer as a medium translates art into reality, into perceptible and decipherable information. The performer's principal task consists in the transfer of the idea of art, like the play, drama, or the installation into a three-dimensional form and into time. Thus, in a performance of the first type shown above, a performer or actor translates an idealistic, purely mental or textual script into experienceable reality, which is recognizably perceptible and noticeable for an audience at the time of the performance. Despite the semantic width of the performance metaphor. Performance theory has entered into sociological theorization and methodology since the mid-1990s. This is generally described as the performative turn. The first attempts to connect performance theory with social sciences states began in the mid-1970s. Richard Schechner recognized 7 fields which must be, on the one hand, essential components of each performance, and on the other hand, sketches and overlaps ranges of social science and performance in order to connect both fields. Schechner identifies performance in everyday life, the structures of sports, ritual, play, and political behaviors. In analysis of different modes of communication, connections between human and animal behavior patterns, aspects of psychotherapy, and emphasis person-to-person interaction, ethnography and prehistory, and the construction of unified theories of performance as theories of behavior. Performance as an event crosses borders which distinguish art against everyday life and different scientific categories. As a consequence of these transgressions, the social sciences started to think about performative behavior, like humans playing gender, stressing their designed identity, or presenting different self-drafts in different situations. Now, let us talk few words about postmodern performance. Although postmodernism cannot be defined, it is still possible to understand the term as an artistic field by observing the components and influences of performances we understand to be postmodern. The intention of the writing is not by any means to attempt to define the term postmodernism, but rather to consider what postmodern performance is, how it opposes traditional theatre aesthetics, and why it does so. Before we can begin this study, let us first consider what we understand a postmodern performance to be. From here, we can begin to look at the influences and principles behind them. So, to borrow the opening passage of Brecht's A Short Organum for the Theatre, the following sets out to define an aesthetic drawn from a particular kind of theatrical performance which has been worked out in practice over the past few decades. Postmodernism in performance is, as it is understood today, a dramatic form that is based on a semiotic understanding of traditional theatrical practice. The semiotics are frequently deconstructed, thereby opposing their original interpretation and leaving them open to translation. In this style of theatre, the performer is more of an artist, seldom a character like an actor, and the content rarely follows a traditional plot. It is a non-narrative, non-representational theatre in which the traditional forms, genres, and practices are abandoned, and non-linguistic modes of practice such as gestures become key components. Dialogue is frequently forced to compete with other elements on the stage, such as music, sound, effects, gestures, sets, props, lighting, mime, and mask. Also, the professional distinctions of actor, playwright, director, stage manager, and spectator are broken down, changing and altering their roles, thus opposing the aesthetics of traditional theatre. Under postmodern performance, we can incorporate experimental theatre. The avant-garde and performance art, as each of these genres breaks free of the conventional theatre and strive to continually create works that challenge and astonish or shock their audiences, depicting what we understand to be postmodernism. Victor Turner terms these styles of theatre to be liminal, a term derived from the Latin word for threshold, limen, which he describes to be marginalized performance, since liminality refers to chaotic, fertile nothingness that is potentially full of possibilities, that strives after new forms and structure in understanding the elements inherent in postmodern performance. It is important to gain a familiarity with the developments against traditional theatre aesthetics over the last century. From this, we can begin to understand where conventions of postmodern performance derive from and how they affect postmodern theatre directly. Now, let us conclude our discussion. The metaphor of performance as a summation of most diverse cultural techniques such as dance, theatre, pantomime, and even outdoor training is turned by non-representational theory into a methodological cornerstone for the understanding of social life in the way that it postulates a break with the dictation of the production of representations. Performance then achieves a methodological status in social theory, and it turns into a methodological instrument in social research. This is due to the fact that the performative turn abolishes the different points of reference of scientific observer and subject of the observation. The social scientific observer becomes even part of the performance, him or herself. The research process as a whole is part of the performance. This holistic conception replaces the laboratory situation for data acquisition with separate roles of the researched person and research observer, with the inclusion of the researcher as an active part into the research process. The causality problem of genetic fallacy becomes redundant. Beyond that, performance as method is not performative due to its direct character. Performance, as argued in this discussion, does not create representations. In fact, it creates practices, and therefore it does not create its own research entities. On the methodological basis of non-representational theory, performance turns itself into a qualitative method which is aligned to the complexity of social life in modernity. Now, let us summarize our whole discussion. This module was on theory of performance and new ambience in performative tradition, and for that, to discuss this theory of performance and new performative ambiences, we have taken few examples to elaborate our discussion from the performance tradition of US, from the performance tradition of Fiji, and different other places. We have pointed out different theories like expressionism, existentialism, postmodernism to elaborate the idea of new ambience, to elaborate the idea of development of theatrical production and the changes in theatrical production. We have ended our discussion mainly with the discussion of postmodernist turn in theatre. And we mentioned few issues about new ambience in performance tradition. And in the conclusion, we have tried to comprehend the idea of performance in the present context. For further reading, you can have a further reading list here, you can see. And to know more beyond this discussion, you can consult the e-text provided here. Thank you.